You will be forgiven for being confused about whether or not you should eat fat. For a long time, people were told to stay away completely. But lately, fat seems to be on the table again, but only certain types of fat. With so many mixed messages about what types of fats to eat, it's no wonder many people are confused about whether or not they should eat them. These are just a few of the reasons why the advice on fats is so confusing, and how much fat you should really eat. Some fat is essential in our diet, as it gives us energy and helps us absorb certain vitamins, including vitamins A, D, and E. But there are many different types of fats, and eating too many of certain types can be harmful to us. Unsaturated fats, also called monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, are known as good fats and are important in helping us lower cholesterol and keep our hearts healthy. Unsaturated fats can be found in foods like avocados, olive or peanut oil, and fish. But saturated fats can be bad for us when eaten in excess and can raise cholesterol and increase the risk of heart disease. Trans fats can also increase cholesterol levels. Foods that contain saturated and trans fats include butter, cheese, bacon, crackers, and fried foods. Fat is important. Many health authorities around the world agree that fat is an important part of a healthy diet, but that we only need to get a certain amount of calories per day from fat. The World Health Organization, WHO, recommends that people get no more than 30% of their daily calories from fat, of which only 10% of daily calories should come from saturated fat, and less than 1% of trans fats. The UK recommendations are very similar, limiting saturated fat to just 10% of our daily calorie intake, around 30 g per day for men, around 270 calories, and 20 g for women, around 180 calories. But in Europe, health recommendations suggest that fat should account for 20 to 35% of our total daily calories. There are also no recommendations on how many calories should come from saturated or trans fats, only that they should be limited. In the US, people are only advised to limit their intake of saturated fat to less than 10% of daily calories. So while there seems to be agreement on how much fat people should eat, slight variations in these recommendations, as well as variations in the amount of certain types of fats we should eat, could explain the confusion about whether or not we should eat fat. And how much should we eat? Misleading advice. If all the different recommendations weren't confusing enough, there is also a lot of information that is too simplistic or wrong. This makes fat consumption recommendations even more complicated. For example, the Joint British Societies, which publishes recommendations to help people reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease, recommends that only about 10% of a person's total fat intake comes from saturated fat. Since we typically consume 30 to 40% of our calories from fat, and government and international bodies recommend that about 30% of our daily calories come from fat, limiting saturated fat to 10% of this would mean that would constitute only 3% of our day's calories. This would amount to just over 7 g of saturated fat, about 2 teaspoons of butter. This differs from many other recommendations, such as the WHO, which states that 10% of all calories that people eat each day must come from saturated fat. It is also unclear whether such a strict restriction of saturated fat would have any benefit and would be difficult to achieve for many people, since a variety of healthy foods, such as olive oil, can also contain saturated fat. There's also a lot of advice that's too simplistic, which can be inadvertently misleading. For example, one tip the British Heart Foundation recommends for swapping saturated for unsaturated fats is to use a spray oil or measuring oils, instead of just pouring it straight from the bottle. But this doesn't account for the fact that different types of oil have different saturated fat levels. Sunflower oil, for example, is already low in saturated fat, so using less would significantly reduce calories but only modestly reduce saturated fat levels. Other advice from the British Heart Foundation includes avoiding frying foods and switching to semi-skimmed milk. But focusing on methods that have a minimal effect on saturated fat levels can make it more confusing to know which foods and fats to avoid. The easiest way to avoid saturated fats is avoiding foods like pies, cakes, and biscuits. These foods are high in saturated fats and tend to be the greatest sources of them in most people's diets. Getting the right amount. Research suggests that we should get around a third of our energy from fat, 2/3 of which should be unsaturated fats. Of course, certain food sources will contain different types of fats and different levels of fats. For example, avocados and pies are both high in fat. But avocados are high in healthy monounsaturated fats, which are good for heart health and can lower cholesterol. Pies, on the other hand, are high in saturated fats, which can be bad for your heart and cholesterol levels. The easiest way to make sure you're eating enough of the right fats is to avoid foods that contain saturated and trans fats, such as butter, hard cheeses, pies, biscuits, pastries, cakes, processed meats, and crisps. These foods are also high in salt, carbohydrates, and sugar, so can also have other health harms such as increasing risk of high blood pressure. Instead, try including sources of healthy fats, such as avocados, olive oil, nuts, and fish. This will ensure that you're not only getting enough fat in your diet, but that you're getting the right kind of fats, around 75 g a day for women and 90 g for men. Our channel is committed to ensuring your health. We hope you enjoyed the video well. If the video is helpful for you, so why leaving without subscribing? Because we want such useful videos to reach you all the time and help you to spend your life with good health. We wish you good health. Thanks for watching.